Hi folks, we're going to start studying World War II in American history class, and this unit is called Isolation to Intervention because the focus in studying World War II in American history is about how did the United States become involved. So in addition to that, you will also be studying how were the American people affected by the war. So our first section is called isolationism. You should know what that means. If not, you might want to take a break and look back at your vocab packet to make sure that you have it fresh in your mind. So I have the president here. I wonder if you can notice who he is. Do you recognize him? It's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he is the president through the 1930s when the United States is going through the Great Depression as well as this trend of isolationism. And here you can see is a rally poster that says no foreign entanglements. And we've heard this phrase before, that the people of the United States did not want to become involved in any more war, so this was from a protest. What you should be able to do after watching this video is to be able to talk about why Americans didn't want to be involved in a war. Why were Americans isolationist in the 1930s? And you'll be able to identify two policies, isolationist policies. So I want you to think about the setting. Remember that the 1930s is when the Great Depression is happening, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. And many countries look to a very strong leader to help guide them out of the Depression and help establish their economy. Now, in the United States, we elected Franklin Roosevelt, and he was wonderful at creating new programs, remember the 3 R's, to get the American people back on their feet and to build the economy again. However, other countries didn't have Roosevelt to help them get out of this depression. So you see a rise in dictators. Dictators come to power when there's a lot of chaos going on, and that's exactly what these 4 guys do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on our first 3 here. You've got Benito Mussolini from Italy, Joseph Stalin from the USSR or Russia, Soviet Union, and then Hitler from Germany. This is Emperor Hirohito, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on. You've already learned about these 3 guys. You know that Russians support communism and that Stalin is responsible for the downfall of the Soviet Union, both economically as well as socially. He set up concentration camps and he ruined the economy. Remember that Benito Mussolini emphasized fascism, which is the idea that it's like this aggressive, extreme nationalism in which people don't really matter. The only thing that matters is the country. And then lastly is Hitler. I do have 2 things to talk about here that I want you to know, that Hitler was actually arrested before for trying to take over the government. So in 1923, he is arrested and gets sent to jail. He spends a few years in jail. And by 1933, he was actually back in the government, a leader of a prominent political party, the Nazis, and he was appointed chancellor. He was appointed his high position in the German government democratically. He got there with the full blessing of the people. So that's really important to think about when you're thinking about voting and about how important it is to select candidates that you think are representative of you. So, Emperor Hirohito was the ruler of Japan in the 1930s and into the war. And he was militarist, he was extremely nationalist, and he had this idea of empire, which is this imperialist idea. So you can see here this map. This is the Japanese Empire in 1942. So, but I want to back up before that, and I want to talk about how it all began. And it all began because Japan was obviously feeling the Great Depression. So they were suffering economically. So Hirohito decides that the way to pull people out of that and to make Japan great was to build up their military and take over other land. So what they do is, you can see Japan right here, they invade China and move up to Manchuria in 1931. And remember the rape of Nanking from last year? If you don't, you should Google it because it's crazy. The Japanese soldiers are intensely brutal to the people who live in China. And then the Japanese are able to take full control of this region by 1941. So the United States sees this happening. However, I want to talk about these things before we talk about what the United States did to react. So all four of these men have actually a lot of things in common. They relied heavily on their military. They wanted to expand their countries. They were extremely nationalistic, and they used that to get people to support them. They were brutal, and they promised to fix everyone's problems. So they really appealed to the people during the era of the Great Depression. Now, something that they also have in common is that they were pretty much allowed to do what they were doing by the international community because the League of Nations failed. And why did the League of Nations fail? I hope that you know this from our previous units. They failed because the United States and Russia did not join. So this idea of collective security, helping everybody out to make sure that a war doesn't break out again, did not work. Okay, so what's going on in the United States? Americans want to stay out of the war. They want to stay out of the conflict in Europe. And there's a few reasons why. So the first reason, this is important, the United States wanted to stay isolationist because of the Great Depression. They had loaned money to European countries during World War I, and they were not getting paid. They weren't getting paid the money that they had loaned out during World War I. It was the Great Depression, so one reason is economics. There were several economic reasons. They weren't getting paid their loans from World War I, and it was the Great Depression. Another reason why Americans wanted to stay isolated was because they felt like World War I didn't really do any good, because here we are at the end of the 1930s and another war is breaking out. Okay, so I want you to think about how America was isolated from Latin America and Europe, two places that had formerly been very involved. So previously, the United States had this policy of big stick diplomacy. And this is the idea that the United States uses its military and its economy to force Latin American countries to do what is best for the U.S. Remember, the U.S. had taken over Cuba, they've taken over Puerto Rico, and a lot of other Latin American countries. So when Roosevelt came into office, he said, we're going to be good neighbors to these people, and we are not going to interfere with anything that they decide that they want to do. So they are staying isolated from Latin America. And then Europe. So after World War I, as I said, the United States was not getting paid their loans back. And so the United States Congress passed the Neutrality Acts, and as well as the cash and carry policy. And we're going to talk about those in depth now. So the Neutrality Acts are significant because these are examples of isolationist policy, right? Why did Americans not want to get involved? So if you think about it, if you don't have enough money to get involved in something, people aren't in support of that. And during the 1930s, the U.S. doesn't have that money. So you have the Neutrality Acts here, and you can look at all three of these, but what I really want you to notice is the progression. The progression between 1935 and 1939. The United States stays completely neutral at first. We are not selling weapons to any country at all. It is illegal. And then the United States says, you know what? We want to not sell military supplies, and if you're buying other supplies from us, you have to do it on this cash carry basis. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. But lastly, the United States realizes in 1939 that the war has begun, right? In 1939, the war officially begins, and the United States can see their allies needing help. However, they do not want to fight. And we always hear this term, boots on the ground. Well, the United States did not want to commit troops and boots on the ground. So they do this instead. They say, we'll sell you some weapons, but it's got to be cash and carry. So cash and carry policy is important because it attempted to keep the U.S. out of this big conflict, which is what the public opinion wanted. However, it also allowed the U.S. to help their allies and try to stay as safe as possible while still appeasing the public that didn't want to be involved. We see this idea this Neutrality Act of 1939 idea in the Middle East today. The United States says, we aren't going to get involved in Syria on the ground, but we'll give some weapons and some training out. So I want you to remember, why cash and carry? Why do they say that the Allies are allowed to bring over cash in exchange for weapons, but the United States would not transport those weapons for them? So this is important. The U.S. won't transport weapons for the Allied powers, and they have to pay in cash. Now this is important because World War I began because of what? Think about boats. Can you remember? World War I began because German submarines were sinking U.S. cargo ships that were carrying supplies to the other side. So the United States was like, we do not want Germans to sink our ships and get us involved in a war again. So they've got to come over and get it themselves. Okay, so Hitler officially invades Poland on September 1st of 1939, and I just want you to see here that Hitler and Mussolini actually become allies in 36, but they formally are in 39. Remember, at first, the Soviet Union is allied with Germany, and they invade Poland together, but then Germany turns on the Soviet Union. So in 1940, Japan aligns with Hitler and Mussolini, but by 1941, Hitler invades the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is no longer a part of the Axis powers. So that leaves the Axis powers as Italy, Germany, and Japan. So the United States stays in this argumentative zone. Like, what should we do? There's huge debate going on. Should the United States stay isolated, or should they intervene? What do you think? What would you do? So what I want you to do now is to answer your questions. Remember, you should be flipping your card to green when you're ready to be stamped, and do not wait on me. Keep moving. Good luck.